All right. This slide you already saw. You probably don't have to write anything down from it, but where we left off kind of last time, after America was getting into the war, and then how we were preparing for it, one of the things that I mentioned was the Russian Revolution. It's also often called the Bolshevik Revolution. Bolshevik just meant in Russian, it was kind of like the majority group that was taking over. So you could really kind of almost think of it in English as like the majority revolution. Anyway, if you ever hear the Bolshevik Revolution or the Russian Revolution, the Communist Revolution, no, it's all generally talking about the same thing. What played out in Russia midway through World War I in 1917, when that whole nation falls out of the war and has a revolution and goes over to becoming a communist power and changes its name to the Soviet Union. So for a while, it won't be known as Russia. It'll be called the Soviet Union. But no, I kind of use those terms interchangeably. You probably already wrote some of this stuff down, but just in case you hadn't, how this impacts World War I as a whole is now Russia's communist. They stop fighting, and Germany is down to a one-front war. Okay, so that's a big boon for Germany, a good thing. A bad thing that happens right after this, literally within like about a month to 2 months, I think, after Russia drops out of the war, America joins up. So now like Germany's down to one front, but they're going to have another really big, strong country coming in on the front they're fighting on that could tip the tide of the battles. All right, so communism in general, that's a term that gets thrown around an awful lot. This is a term that I hear, I mean, even today in 2020 in modern politics, often like Bernie Sanders is called a communist. I've heard people call Joe Biden one. Now, what does communism mean? Because I think if you go pull the average American off the street and say, do you know what communism is? They'll say yes, for sure. And then you ask them to give you a good definition of what a communist is or explain a communist system, and most people can't. Know that the theory of communism, how it is applied, doesn't always kind of go quite in line with the original theory of it. But for our purposes in this class, I want you to know that communism is, in essence, like ideologically, it's where the workers have taken control of the country. So it's a workers' revolution, or it's often called the proletariat, which means like the working class, the farmers, the factory workers, those average, ordinary laborers. Now, in a communist system, you typically have the government, which is now being controlled by the workers, or so they say, and that's going to manage all the land and production. So they're going to control the farms. Those farmers are just kind of renting land, more or less, from the government, and they're producing their crops on behalf of the state, and the state can take whatever they want from them. If you're in a factory, the government's going to tell you what we need to produce and how much of it you're going to produce. There's no like free market where people can just go start their own business. It doesn't really function that way. So in theory, it might sound really good, but there's a lot of problems with how communism actually plays out. We're going to get into that more as the course goes on. Not super in depth with it today. But I would also want you to know that the Soviet Union is created in 1917. So Russia essentially stops being Russia, and now it's going to start being the Soviet Union. Now, eventually the Soviet Union collapses. We'll cover that like in quarter 4, and it goes back to being Russia. But I kind of use the terms interchangeably. So if you ever hear me say Soviet Union or Russia, or even say like the term red, I'm talking about like the communist Soviet Union, generally from this era of the last 100 years. Anyway, I just don't want you to get confused with those. And then their flag is right here on the slide too. Notice it's all red. That's like the communist color. And then they have the big hammer and sickle there. Do you ever wonder what that means? Have you seen it before? Most people have at least seen it. So the symbolism behind it is the hammer represents the industrial workers and the sickle represents the farmers. So it was kind of like the farmers and the industrial workers, the factory workers, have joined together, and now this is their country. Sounds good on the surface, but doesn't often play out good for the average person, because you typically it leads to a very corrupt system where these officials that just want power start managing everything how it would benefit them. But I digress. We'll get more into that, the ins and outs of it down the road. Okay, if you have other stuff to do and are super busy and you're not real super interested in World War One maybe, or in what I was talking about in Russia, this is where you can tune out. You've hit those slides, you've added that stuff to your notes, you'll be good to go for anything that'd be on a test. Everything after this won't be on the test. But I will say the second half of this presentation is going to be quite a bit more interesting than the first half. This is where you get all the drama and some of the personal interest stories in history. And boy, let me tell you, everything surrounding the Russian Revolution, it's quite a doozy. So this will take me a little while to tell the story, but I think it'll be worth your while if you stay tuned in. First up, communism, kind of ironically, even though it takes hold first in Russia, which is now going to be the Soviet Union, it actually was kind of born in Germany. Karl Marx is the father of communism. So if you ever hear somebody saying throwing the term out, you're a Marxist, or you're subscribing to the teachings of Marx. Marxism and communism essentially are the same thing. Marx was just the founder of kind of the modern idea of communism. He wrote what was called the Communist Manifesto, where he kind of laid out his ideas that down the road, corruption has gotten so bad that workers are going to eventually be fed up with it and they're going to overthrow their masters. And he thought there would be a worldwide communist revolution where governments would be managed on behalf of the people all around the planet. Okay? When the Soviet Union, which is land-wise the biggest country in the world, goes communist, now a lot of people start taking Marx's theories quite serious. Now, Marx was dead and gone at that point. He never really got to see any of that play out. But a lot of people, even to this day, still are very loyal, or they get trained in Marxist ideology. So it's still something that's around. It even gets thrown around as kind of like a taboo or bad word in American politics here in 2020. All right. Next up, we talked about the Tsar who gets overthrown. So Russia is one of the oldest autocracies or dictatorships in Europe at the time. The Russian Empire has been around for 1,000 years and has been steadily expanding. Like I said, Russia land-wise is the largest country on planet Earth. That's still true today. It's massive. It's like 2.5 of the United States or something. Now, the thing is, a lot of Russia is frozen and it's kind of barren tundra, and it's not a really economically advanced country. That was their problem in World War I. They're huge. They even have a bigger army and more soldiers than the Germans do, but their soldiers were so poorly equipped. 20% of the German army was able to fend off the whole Russian army, and they were outnumbered 10-1. But the poor Russian soldiers just don't have the equipment or the training that they need to really be effective in a modern war. Tsar Nicholas is kind of this inept, I don't know, I think he's a well-intentioned, decent human being from what I know about him, but he's like a blue blood, you know what I mean? He is born into this very rich pedigree, the Romanov family or the Romanov dynasty, and he just inherits kind of everything. His dad, I guess, was a pretty good ruler and a stern guy. Unfortunately for Russia at this time, Tsar Nicholas II was just not up for the job of running and managing a country like Russia, especially through a tumultuous time like World War I. I think he truly tried the best he could, but he just didn't have the skill set that he needed. Here is his whole family. So he actually had 4 daughters. He has a wife that he's very close to, and she actually has a lot of power. Alexandra is her name. She has a ton of influence over him, which a lot of people at the Russian court didn't like. In the years leading up to the Russian Revolution, he had slowly had his power kind of chipped away, and they had created a Duma, it's called, which is like a Congress of the Russian people. But it's not like Congress here in America. It was still like the Russian Tsar still had ultimate power and could essentially do whatever he wanted. Well, Russia's been fighting in World War I for several years, and the war is going terrible for them. Even though, you would think Russia's a bigger, stronger country, they were really kind of getting their butt kicked. Another thing that really stressed out the Tsar and his wife was the young son, Alexei, who is the heir to the throne. He's the family future, the guy that's going to inherit the empire after Tsar Nicholas dies one day, they hope of old age. He's very sickly. He is a hemophiliac, so when he gets bruised or gets a cut, he doesn't stop bleeding. Now, he had the best medical care that money could buy, but Russia's still pretty backwards, and they don't have a lot of like great doctors there. Now, of course, like the Tsar and his family will get the best medical treatment, but they really would get stressed out. And many times in his young life, he almost does die, and he comes sick with fever, or he gets bruises, and it doesn't look like they're healing up. And that's where the story really starts to get interesting and twisted. So next up, there's this guy Rasputin. He is one of history's weirdest, most bizarre kind of semi-villains. I don't even quite know how to explain him other than he is every bit as creepy as he appears in his pictures. So Rasputin was actually like from out in the frontier. He grew up out in Siberia somewhere, you know what I mean? Out in the backwoods, kind of a hick or a hillbilly, a redneck you might think of. He becomes a priest, okay? Now, you might think as a priest, he's like a moral guy and he's all about, the things, preaching morals and ethics and whatnot. But that was not the case. He is a total degenerate drunk. He's a womanizer. He pursues women all the time. He just has like no self-respect. He's very crude, burps, makes really vulgar jokes all the time, is constantly swearing. He doesn't know his place, and he's very outspoken. And even people that are way above his social class, he would challenge them and call them out. And so like that's kind of a weird thing to him, and yet he is able to climb the heights of power and become one of the top advisors to the wife of Tsar Nicholas. Now, how the heck would this dirty, scrubby, kind of nasty, drunken priest get to do that? Well, he was able to make predictions that to this day, we have no idea how he was able to like predict and know the things that he knew. He actually would write letters to the family, and he would talk about the health of the young son, Alexei, when he was going through like really horrific bouts of fever or had like terrible illnesses or had bad bruises that, and his hemophilia was not allowing his body to heal up. And basically he would come and put his hands on Alexei once they actually decided to try this crazy priest from the frontier out. And multiple times he was able to basically like heal him. Now, who knows exactly what was going on? Was he hypnotizing him? Did he have some medical technology that we're unaware of today? Your guess is as good as mine. That's kind of one of history's mysteries. But multiple times he would come in and apparently like heal Alexei and like save him from death. Now, because he was able to do that, Alexandra, who is the Tsaress, the Empress of Russia, it's not like they were lovers or had a romantic relationship, but she becomes very attached to him. Because think, if you're a mom and you see your young child suffering, and specifically this is the young boy and he's going to be the emperor one day, you have a lot riding on this kid. And I guess the Tsar Nicholas and his wife genuinely loved all their children. That's one thing that's kind of a human element of this that makes this whole story a little bit more tragic and heartbreaking. They sound like actual decent people. I don't think they were very good rulers. They weren't too savvy or set up to run a country like Russia and bring it into modern times, but they were absolutely caring, loving parents. And it was heartbreaking to them every time that Alexei's condition would turn for the worse. And they gradually more and more start bringing this guy Rasputin in to help heal their son. The court, all of the people that surrounded the emperor, they hate Rasputin. They can't stand him. He makes dirty jokes. He's often drunk at meetings. He's going around trying to have sex with these other very like kind of high society women. And I guess often he was successful, but then he'll go hang out at the brothels. He was disgusting. He would like go around naked. He would take his clothes off. He would belch really loud. He's just a weird character that they can't stand. They're used to this refined life, and having a priest like this in there, it doesn't set well with him. But he's basically untouchable because he has the favor of the Tsaress. And the Tsaress is really close to the Tsar, the Emperor, Nicholas. And she keeps telling him that we need this guy around, so he never takes any action against them, no matter how inappropriately he asks. He also made the one like kind of prediction or prophecy he made that always sticks into my head. A few months before the revolution happens, he sends a letter to the Tsar, who at that point, the Tsar is out in the front lines. He's trying to rally the troops and turn the war in the right direction. And he says, "You're abandoning your people at home." Okay, this is Rasputin talking to the Tsar. And he said, "I have enemies that are kind of coming after me. And if you let anything bad happen to me, for certain, the empire and its father will fall within a year," which all of that ends up coming true because Rasputin is murdered. I'm going to get into that story in just a minute. And within about 6 months of that, there is the revolution. And then shortly after that, Russia falls, leaves the war, and then eventually the Tsar and his whole family are murdered by the communists. Now, the Rasputin murder story, there were many noblemen that hated his guts, but nobody quite wanted to take him out or assassinate him because they were worried that that might turn the Tsar and Tsaress against them, and then they would be targeted and be out in the cold or exiled or something. Eventually, this one guy, Filipov, who is like a cousin to the Tsar, and he's extremely wealthy, invites Rasputin over to his house for dinner. And he was able to get him over there because it wasn't like they were good friends, but actually Felix was the guy's name, the nobleman. He says, "Rasputin, you know what? Why don't you come over and have some drinks and have a fine dinner with me? And maybe I'll let you, hang out with my wife." Wink, wink. You know what I mean? Now, Rasputin, the constant drunk and womanizer that he was, couldn't resist an offer like that. So, of course, he comes over. Well, through the course of the dinner, Felix and one of his other nobleman buddies, they slipped tons of arsenic into the wine Rasputin was drinking and the food. But he sits there and drinks multiple glasses of wine and eats plates of food, I guess, just totally gorges himself. And the poison apparently seemed to have no effect on him. They start getting weird because they gave him like enough poison to kill a horse, and he's like totally unaffected by it. He complains about having a belly problem a little bit, like his little indigestion, but seems totally unaffected by it and fine. They can't figure out what's going on there. Eventually, they kind of work up the courage and they go in and out of the room a few times. Rasputin starts getting patient and asking about his wife. Felix comes back in and they decide that they're going to murder him. So they stab him. They attack him, all right, start cutting him. They stab him multiple times. And I guess Rasputin freaks out, as you would if you're getting stabbed, and he starts screaming at them and fighting back like a wild maniac because look at the guy. He probably was a wild maniac. And he's all drunk and has arsenic in his body. So who knows what's going through his system and mind at that moment. Well, they break up and kind of run out of the house and they think they've killed him, but they come back in. He's not dead. He's up and moving. So they shoot him multiple times with a revolver. Shoot him, shoot him. He keeps coming and moving. He comes chasing them down the stairs. This becomes like a comedy of errors. And he's screaming at them, I guess, "Felix, I'm going to tell Papa." Papa was his name for the Tsar. I'm going to tell them how bad you've been. And remember, he has the Tsar's favor, kind of, because he's healed his son so many times. The Tsar did not approve this assassination. So Felix is actually quite worried about that. He doesn't want this guy living after this and going and like tattling on him because he feels like, the Tsar has absolute power. He could end up cutting my head off. They shoot him again once he's down there. Now, he's had enough poison to kill a horse. He's been stabbed multiple times. He's been shot a couple times. Finally, they shoot him right in the head, and he appears to go down and be dead. One would think, right? A revolver round right between the eyes, kind of in the forehead. Okay, so now what are they going to do with it? I guess they were freaking out, stressed out, didn't know quite what to do, and they decide, this is in the Russian winter now, and it is cold. Like you'd be up almost in like northern Canada, further north than Michigan, and it's like a blizzard outside. But there's a river by Felix's house. So they're going to go chop the ice in the river, and they wrap him in a big, like, I don't know, kind of like a blanket towel type thing, or like a tapestry rug of sorts. They wrap Rasputin's body in that, and they go dump him in the frozen river. Now, the last little kicker of the story. the word eventually gets out that Rasputin's murdered. The Tsaress is beside herself. She's very upset, but word doesn't leak out exactly how this all went down right at the time. The next day, they go fish his body out of the river. They find it. And when they pull him out of the river and kind of unwrap him, they do an autopsy on him where the doctor gives an official report of what killed him. In the autopsy report, they find water in his lungs, which, think about this. If you are shot and killed, unless you're shot through the lungs, you're not breathing and you get dumped in water. So when they would do an autopsy, your lungs are still dry because you're not breathing in the water, and it typically doesn't flood in like down through your throat. He was still breathing at the time, is what they assume. So after all of that stuff that happened to him, he still possibly wasn't quite totally dead yet. And it was like the frozen, tundra, the frozen river in Russia was what finally got him. What a weird story, huh? Anyway, there is a longer version of it. If you're interested in that or ever want to just do a report or something for a class on one of the creepiest guys from history, check out Rasputin. He's your dude. So Rasputin's gone and out of the way. Germany realizes that Russia is teetering on the brink and that there's a lot of internal problems there. So the German leadership, being pretty savvy most of the time, they're like, man, what can we do to just kind of like kick the structure in? It's like if the house is on fire, can we just kind of do one more little thing to knock it down? And that one more little thing is releasing this guy, Vladimir Lenin, back into Russia. He had been exiled by the Tsar because he was long known to be a communist revolutionary who was trying to stir up trouble. So he is a native Russian, but he's been kicked out of Russia for a very long time. And he's actually been living in Switzerland. Switzerland is a neutral country that was not involved in the war. It borders Germany. They're primarily a German-speaking people. Well, the German leadership go talk to the Swiss who are not in the war, and they say, hey, how about we get that guy Vladimir Lenin from you, and we're going to, maybe take him back over to the Russian frontier and turn him loose. The Swiss, for whatever reason, allow it. They have no real dog in the fight. So they take him in a covered train car all the way across Germany. And I don't know why they covered it up, but they wouldn't even let him see the windows outside, because the Germans, even though Marx, the original communist, was a German guy, the Germans are very paranoid about communism. When we get to World War II and Hitler and the Nazis taking over, Hitler and the Nazis, they thought their number one enemies in the world were the Jews and the communists. Okay. So Germany, even though there is kind of a small chunk of the population that likes communism, as a whole, Germany is a very anti-communist nation. So they're worried that just Lenin looking outside from the train might infect the country or something. So they keep him under wraps in kind of a top secret mission, train him as fast as they can across Germany. They get him out kind of deep into Russia, and they just turn him loose and let him go. And they feel like this guy's a pretty capable leader. He's pretty smart. He's kind of well-liked and fairly well-known in Russia. And sure enough, within months, he's able to stir up trouble, and the revolution happens. Food is not flowing good. The war effort's going terrible. They're losing tons of soldiers. There's just massive unrest. The Tsar had not done a good job managing hardly anything, the economy or the war effort, and people turn on him in a big way. And there's riots, bread riots in the street. And the army basically just says, we're done fighting. And guys, whole units just start leaving the front lines. And Germany is like, jackpot. This worked perfectly. Now, Lenin is going to be the new leader of this government. He is fairly well liked by everybody and able to put a big coalition together. He's kind of like maybe their George Washington or something like that, where all the communists kind of like him. Now, when he dies a few years later, then there's going to be a big struggle for power. But as long as he's there, he's pretty much kind of unanimously the leader. He's the man. He keeps the Tsar and his whole family. Now we're getting to the very end part here. So the Tsar's family, remember Tsar Nicholas and his 4 daughters, son Alexei and his wife Alexandra, they are being held kind of like as political prisoners. He doesn't murder them right away. He's not quite sure what to do with them. I guess Lenin debates it, and they keep them kind of in a safe house away from everybody. And he's trying to organize the country. He's trying to sign a treaty with Germany and not lose too much territory. But about a year after the revolution takes place, maybe a little bit more than that, and World War I at this point has come to a close, Lenin finally says, let's get rid of these guys. They were being held out in a house in Siberia, kind of way out in the woods, away from everybody at some big, Russian nobleman's estate. And apparently they had taken lots of jewels and diamonds and stuff. And they were hoping that they would get put into exile and that they would maybe be released to like Great Britain or France or who knows where. But they were hoping to get out of Russia. And even though they had lost power, they would be able to survive. And remember, like I said, they genuinely loved each other. They were a loving family and very much caring parents. Now, one night in the middle of the night, when the order comes through essentially from Lenin and the communist leadership that, okay, we need to make sure there are no more heirs to the throne. The dynasty is going to end now, and we have to get rid of them because they didn't want a counter-revolution to happen. They didn't want to get kicked out of power and then have Tsar Nicholas or young Alexei get put back on the throne. So the communist guards that had been drinking vodka all day, get the order that they're going to assassinate the family that night. So in the middle of the night, they go wake them all up and say, we're moving you. They don't tell them they're getting killed, but they realize something bad is happening. So they all put their dresses on and their fine clothes. Apparently the wife and the daughters all had lined their dresses and corsets with tons of gems, rubies, and diamonds, all of these precious stones that the Russian family had hoarded over years. And they take the whole family down into the basement. And then I guess it was an awkward moment where they have like Tsar Nicholas sitting in a chair, everybody's standing around him, and there's like 10 communist guards there with guns and whatnot. And eventually one of these drunken guards finally acts first, and he shoots the Tsar in the head. He's done for. There's screaming and chaos, and they start shooting at the women and young Alexei. But essentially, because they had all of those gems in their shirts under their dresses, they almost had like bulletproof vests on. So the bullets aren't working. They're shooting. And these guys, remember, are drunk and not that good at aims to begin with. And I guess it was just a horrific, grisly scene where there's screaming and chaos. Eventually, these guards get out. A couple of them had rifles. They get out their bayonets and they finish the job. But the whole Russian family, it's a pretty sad, tragic end for them. They're all murdered in a very grisly way and buried out in the frontier. And that's kind of the end of the Romanov dynasty, and they will never return. And the communists at that point are firmly in control of Russia, aka the Soviet Union. Last little tidbit for you. Many of you have probably seen the Disney film Anastasia. That is kind of a conspiracy theory type thing that Anastasia, who is, I believe, this daughter right here, the third daughter, that one of those communist guards took pity on her and didn't kill her and saved her. Now, that was a big rumor for years and years because apparently decades later, a woman pops up into I believe it was a Russian hospital claiming to be Anastasia, that she had been like shown mercy and was not killed and in hiding for years. And she tries to claim the throne and come back to power, and it doesn't work out. But that was a big conspiracy theory that was around for years. Since then, in kind of more modern times, they've actually gone and found the grave sites of the whole family. And apparently they did find Anastasia's remains. So it's been confirmed today that was not the case. She didn't survive. So all around tragic end for the Romanovs. And now the communists, led by this guy Lenin, are going to be firmly in power of Russia. And the Soviet Union is going to be one of our arch rivals in the years moving forward. They're going to play a big role in World War II. And then after World War II, it's kind of Russia and the United States squaring off as the two global superpowers. So that's a lot of foreshadowing of what's to come. All right. If you stayed tuned into the end, hopefully you know a little bit more about history and the Russian Revolution, and I really hope you found it valuable and interesting and engaging. All right, take care. Have a good weekend.